Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Headlines often capture the public's attention, but for more than a century it has been the newspaper columnists whose words have really captured the pulse of the people. And now a new book offers a snapshot at some of the best columns, from Ernest Hemingway to Jack Newfield. Joining us to talk about Deadline artists are one of the editors, John Avlon, as well as two of the contributors, Daily News columnist Stanley and longtime journalist and author Pete Hamill. I should note, of course, that I am also one of the editors of Deadline artists. Let me start with John. Let's talk a little bit about how this thing came about. You and I were sitting in the New York Sun's newsroom a few years ago, and the question came up, where are the good columns that we can borrow, steal, imitate, or otherwise learn from?
That's right, that's right. You know, I'd come from being a speechwriter, and there's a book speechwriters get when you start out, William Sapphire's Lend Me Your Ears. It's got all the greatest columns, or rather speeches. And so it's an opportunity to kind of sit down and internalize the best of the past and kind of educate yourself. So this was the book that I wanted to read starting out, started talking with you, ultimately spoke to our colleague, the late, great Jack Newfield, and started saying, okay, there's no book like that. No one's ever brought together the best of columns into one anthology. And so we started asking him, what are your favorites? So he mentioned Westbrook Pegler, for Death of Frankie Jerome. And we took us 3 months to find it. Hadn't been anthologized since 1924. And so the big idea is, you know, people are talking about the death of newspapers every day, but opinion writing is proliferating like never before online. But what we don't have is, I think, the sense of the best of the past, the craftsmen, who you guys are part of, how just great they were. And so in the spirit of kind of trying to learn from the best of the past, we had more fun putting this together.
So instead of just bugging you guys all the time, we figured we'd make it official, put it between the covers of a book. Right. But let's talk a little bit about sort of how this came about. I mean, I don't know the particulars of how you guys, I mean, you've done, both of you, a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of writing. How did you settle on newspaper columns as a channel to sort of put your opinion out?
Well, I think that the newspaper column ideally allows you to speak directly to the public, but it also forces you to find a vocabulary that is common to the public. So if I'm writing an essay for Harper's or someplace, I use one vocabulary. If I'm writing for the Daily News, I don't use that vocabulary because I don't want to lose anybody who reads the Daily News, but I also don't want to become another person. So the question is like, it's almost like a trumpet player using a mute. So they puts a mute in and he plays with the mute. So he's not going to blast you with a mute, but he's still going to play the same way. It's still going to be him. And so when you write a column to me, it's basically that's the same problem. Is you want to make your sound work, but you also want it to be the reader to be susceptible to the sound you're using.
And Pete, you ran the city room at the Daily News. You've run these things. Where does the columnist fit in, I guess, into the symphony of what's inside the newspaper?
To me, it was always like being a soloist in the Basie band. You know, you get up and blow your 8 bars or 16 bars, but you were not the band. The band were all the hard news reporters, the photographers, the editors who made sure that it was as sharp and right as it could be under the pressure of deadlines and space. So to have it was a kind of a privilege. But the columns that I did, and Stanley, remember, wrote columns at The Voice before coming to the news. Most of us, Breslin and Kempton and a lot of the others, Royko and others in other cities, we were paid to have opinions, but the opinions were based on reporting. You went to the murder, and then you had an opinion about it if you wanted to. And that was an amazing privilege that I think every one of us felt, we got to be careful here. We're not going to make things worse, for example, if there's something going on. I remember Seamus Heaney, the poet, saying one time he never wanted to write a poem about Ireland, Northern Ireland, that would get one kid killed. You know, that there's a responsibility to it. But also you had amazing feedback, so you knew more or less what people were thinking, and you got a lot of mail, actual mail on paper.
People yelling at you in the streets?
No, in the subway. Or when you went on television, Stanley must have done that. you know, they'd stop you in the subway. I seen you on some show last night. Yeah, what'd you think? He says, where'd you get that tie?
Of course, the visual medium.
You know,
Right.
at that time, at that period.
Or they would say, I don't remember what you said, but it was good.
Yeah, over and over again.
Right.
Well, let's talk some about what else is in the book. I mean, we got a lot of guys. There are the people that we all think of and we know here in the city and in other cities like in Detroit and in Chicago and in Philadelphia. But we try to be broader as well and bring in some of the other voices.
Yeah, we organize it thematically, right? That was one of the questions. How do you organize a book like this? So we broke it into sections: war, politics, sports, humor, crime, civil rights, farewells, kind of those eulogy columns, hard times. And we tried to make sure we're representative, you know, of different cities, so you didn't get stuck in that New York mindset, but also different eras. So, you know, the early stuff is you get Mencken and Will Rogers and William Allen White. Then you get to Dorothy Thompson, who kind of ruled the 30s, and Ernie Pyle. And then the 50s, of course, you get Breslin and Kempton and those guys and yourselves. And for me, it was just to your point, you know, the art of the reported column. First of all, I think it is an American art form, the newspaper column. And second, you know, it's what we do too often today as online columnists is you can do the research from sitting behind your desk with a computer. So the shoe leather doesn't get used. People don't knock on doors as much. And that I think ultimately takes away. So I think part of the idea of this is to help our generation up its game, to realize how good it can be. And the same opportunity exists and probably more. So when you realize it's like a young jazz musician learning from the best of the past, but the stuff hasn't been accessible because frankly it's not been available online. So now, you know, it's available in one place, and hopefully it creates that kind of a relationship of respect.
Well, you know, there's also something that happened to me one time. I don't remember if Pete was there, but I was at a party that Jack Newfield had, and the news came on, right? So Jimmy Breslin came in, and he was standing there smoking his cigar, and he was looking at the newscast, and he said, I don't believe that. He said, they should have asked so-and-so and so-and-so. Oh, that's shot. Oh, this happened and so and so. They should have gone to, you know. And he started just making notes to himself about, okay, well, now I'm going to actually show these people how to report an event, because what always struck me when I was around Jack, or around Pete, around Breslin, around any of these guys, they actually knew New York.
Yeah.
See, it wasn't like, oh, well. If they were boys, like if they were from Brooklyn, they actually knew Brooklyn. It wasn't like Brooklyn was an address that I had between X year and X year. They actually knew it, and they knew how the people were, because one time when Pete was the editor at the Daily News, he was explaining something to me about how people bought newspapers before they got on trains. Right? So I was, because there was, as they call it today, some kind of there was some dust up at the paper about something, but he said it's simple. A guy gets in the morning, he goes to the newspaper stand and he picks up 2 or 3 papers. He says, now, what this guy wants to do now will make our newspaper not be there when this guy gets on the train, right? Now he might be saving some money doing something else, but the paper will not be there when just as he's getting ready to get on the train. And so all I'm just saying is that all of these people, they actually knew something about the human particulars of the events, and they knew the situations. They knew how people lived, where they lived, and what they thought. You know,
and how to read it, you know, how to see it.
Let's take a break. We're going to talk some more with these Deadline artists in just a moment. Later on, I'll tell you how you can comment on tonight's program. Stay with us.